thank you to the whole team for putting this together, this wonderful fireside, which of course the OZ Whitehead Fireside has now become famous all over the world. In America, we call it the OZ Whitehead Fireside, not Z. I see some friends here that I want to say hello to. Arthur Dahl, Thelma Batchelor, Sholay Quinn, it's wonderful to see your faces, and many of the others as well. It's just great to have this. The other day, Hooper Dunbar and I were having lunch. He lives nearby, luckily, and Hooper said Zoom has re-internationalized the Baha'i faith. We get to speak to each other across oceans and continents. It's just an incredible technology and opportunity for all of us to hear each other all around the world. So tonight we're going to hear Payam Zamani. Payam and I have worked together for many years on a project called BahaiTeachings.org, which he will tell you more about. Payam is a refugee and an immigrant from Iran. He fled Iran as a teenager. I'm going to ask him to tell you that story. It's pretty dramatic. And he came to the United States with $75 in his pocket, like I said, as a teenager, and he became a very successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He runs tech companies. He started many of them, continues to do that. He's an incubator, an early encourager of other tech entrepreneurs, and just an all-around incredible entrepreneur and innovator in his field. So Payam, welcome.
Thank you, David, and thanks to everyone. No, I just turned 50 a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like this is the best birthday gift I could have received, to be here with you tonight, and I really, really appreciate it. And also, so much, hearing so much about Ireland reminds me of, I think it was 3.5 years ago. As a family, we had the opportunity to go to Kilkenny to the Baha'i school there. And that was, still when you talk to my kids, they will tell you that that was the best Baha'i school that they ever attended. It was definitely a lot of fun. And Dublin was also an amazing place to visit and spend time there. And also, once again, I feel a bit closer to all of you because we spent last year in Czech Republic. My wife and I and kids, we had taken our daughters to school at Townsend in Czech Republic, and then the pandemic happened and we had to move back. But we were just starting to get used to living in Europe, in Central Europe, and making a lot of new friends. But unfortunately, that had to end rather abruptly, and we had to come back to the US. So I'm really excited to be here with you tonight, and thank you, David, for that introduction. Not really deserving. I appreciate that.
You bet. Okay, folks, let's get started here. The title of this talk is Business and Economy, the Need for a New Framework. First, though, we're going to delve into a little bit of Payam's framework. Growing up in Iran, Payam, you and your whole family suffered because of your commitment to the Baha'i faith. And it resulted in your becoming a refugee and immigrating to the United States. Can you tell us a little bit of that story?
So to make a long story as short as I can, my father was not born in a Baha'i family, and he was a Muslim. And I'll make it really short, but basically his father will not allow him to go to school. This is 1930s, 1940s Iran. Would not allow him to go to school. He would say that if you go to school, you may become a Baha'i, so I'm not going to let you go to school. Well, years passed, and my dad had to leave home, and he basically one day he just walked away, and he was only 11 years old, and he never went back. And ultimately, at the age of 15, when he was under the care of the government, because at some point he was rounded up with many other street kids. He was able to get an education, and then at the age of 18, the government helped him and other kids who were graduating out of this program to get jobs. Well, the job that he was able to get was working at a hospital. This is 1950s Iran, and some of you may remember or may know that in 1950s Iran, they attacked many of the Baha'is. They, in fact, attempted to demolish the Baha'i center in Tehran, and there are some famous images of people on the top of the dome and trying to destroy the Baha'i center of Tehran. And there was a well-known mullah during that time that he would go on the radio every day and would speak really harsh words about the Baha'is. So my father becomes interested, and he finds another Baha'i to find out why is it that this mullah says all these bad things about Baha'is. Well, he, through this friend, gets to know other friends, and ultimately meets two individuals who are later on both executed by the government of Iran after the revolution, Dr. Majzoub and Nasser Bakhtabar. And so he became a Baha'i as a result of meeting these two amazing men. So his father was right that by my dad getting educated, he would become a Baha'i. From my mom's side, my mom's dad was a Baha'i and was born in a Baha'i family. He had met Abdul Baha. But my grandmother became a Baha'i after meeting my grandfather. And finally, when my parents got married, we ended up, and they had decided that we're going to live in places where there were really no Baha'is. And as Baha'is, we call that pioneering, going to places that there is no one else so we can spread the message of the Baha'i faith. And that took us to many remote places in Iran and places that were not very hospitable to our Baha'i family. Examples would be not selling us the necessities. And I was very young at the time, but my brother and sister getting beaten up almost every day, and breaking our windows often at night. So when we would, and this is during Shah's regime, by the way, we're talking about 1970s. So it was a very harsh experience living in those towns as I was growing up.
Thank you, Payam. Tell us a little bit, if you can, about how you came to the United States.
So there are, and I'll share with you this very briefly. After the 1979 revolution, we lived in a small town, and these pioneering experiences took us to many different places in Iran, took us to India for a short period of time. And we were living in a town called Hashgerd, which is about 75 kilometers west of Tehran. And I was expelled from school for being a Baha'i. And then I was in 6th grade and I was expelled from school. And we ended up, after spending a couple of years away from my parents, we ended up moving to Shiraz in 1983. In 1987, the war had gone on for a long time. Baha'is, of course, were having a very difficult time. My parents decided that they would send me to Pakistan. My brother and sister had already left, were older than me. And I'm sure there are people on this call who have gone the same exact route that I went on. But basically, think about good, upstanding citizens trying to find a smuggler, because that's what you need, a smuggler to get you to, the other side. And it is not an easy task for an upstanding Baha'i to get connections and find smugglers who bring bad things to Iran and take, good people out. And, but ultimately my parents were able to find someone. And at the age of 16, I basically had to say my goodbyes to my parents, not knowing I'll ever see them again. And that by itself is a long story. And then I made it to Pakistan, and I spent about a year in Pakistan, and then ultimately was able to join my brother, and we came to the US in 1988.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. I won't ask Payam about it, but someday if you see him, ask him about riding in the back of pickup trucks across the border into Pakistan. Pretty interesting. Payam, what is it you think about the Baha'i faith and its principles that causes the level of sheer hostility and persecution from the Iranian government and some of its people?
You know, that's probably a question that I don't think anyone can really answer adequately, because I think that there are definitely religious elements associated with that, but there are also political elements associated with that. Today I was speaking to a good friend who spent 5 years in prison in Iran, and he's still in Iran. And this good friend was telling me that what happens to Baha'is is a complicated thing. And it has a lot to do with the message that Iranian government wants to send, not to just to Baha'is, but also to non-Baha'is in Iran, but also to countries around the world. But I think there are a few fundamental challenges that Baha'i faith represents. And one of them is that it is a very modern faith, and the way we think about the world, the global view that the Baha'i faith offers humanity, the fact that we believe that in this day and age, we do not need clergy, and we should have a direct relationship with our Creator. That, of course, creates some challenges for a country operated by the clergy. And the fact that we believe science and religion should agree. And if they don't, it is religion that's at fault, because now it's dogma and superstition. Well, that again represents many challenges. The equality of men and women in a country that believes that a woman is really half of a man. There are many of these challenges that Baha'i faith represents for, I think, the religious government of Iran, in addition to political issues.
So tell us what it was like when you and your brother got off the plane in California in 1988. Did you have a little culture shock?
I did, and I'm not sure if any of you spent much time in the U.S. in 1988. I think the cities were not as well operated for the most part. Some of you probably have seen films of New York in the 80s, and there was a bit of lawlessness going on. And San Francisco, a much smaller example of that. But it was not the best example that the U.S. had to offer at the time. And there's still homelessness in San Francisco, but I would say that probably even more so back then. And there has been a revitalizing of San Francisco that has happened after the 1988 earthquake that had not happened yet. This was about 6 months prior to that famous earthquake that happened. But I remember the first thing that I noticed the first time I went to the city of San Francisco was just the number of homeless. And I remember, now, again, you got to keep in mind, I was not able to live with my parents for a few years when I was in Iran because of the fact that I was expelled from the school in the town where we all lived. And then I had left Iran without my parents. Now I've come to a country as a teenage refugee without my parents, and of course seeing people who were raised in the U.S., spoke the language perfectly, seeing them homeless on the street did worry me. I did not speak any English, and I did not have the safety net. I did not have my parents with me, so definitely I was a little bit probably paranoid about what will be my situation in this country.
Well, your fate's turned out pretty well. Paranoia probably, impelled you a little bit. Do you also think that the entrepreneurial spirit that you learned as a young Baha'i in Iran, where, employment was often problematic for Baha'is, do you think that helped you become an entrepreneur in the U.S.?
I think so, and also there are a few reasons that I think being an entrepreneur was a pretty clear path for me. One was that being an entrepreneur generally means that you should be comfortable with taking risks. And there were two times in my life that I was not sure if I'm going to survive what was going on. The first time was when I was 11 years old and I was expelled from school. Basically, a mob of about 100 kids expelling me from school. And, it was surviving that. It was something that to this day, I don't know how that happened. And the second time was basically being in the deserts between Iran and Pakistan. And, there was a time that you didn't know if you may get caught by the border guards on either side. And we had to go on a very long hike without water, without food. And that was the second time that I was not sure about the outcome. But I think that when you go through those kinds of risks and challenges, then other risks, especially in business, they seem rather small. And, it becomes kind of easy to confront them because what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing is that, all right, well, that will not work out. That's fine. I'll still be around. That's not going to kill me. And so I think that, yes, that did change my perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a Vietnam veteran, as some of you know, and that's what we used to say in Vietnam when somebody didn't follow the rules. The old saying among the soldiers was, "What are they going to do? Send us to Vietnam?" We were already there.
Yeah.
So you run, Payam, a successful Silicon Valley tech company, and you've started and run other successful tech companies. Do you think of yourself as a capitalist?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know but I guess if I don't use the word capitalist, I'm not sure what is the alternative to use. But I would say that there's a word that needs to be figured out. It is a new way of doing things. Now, some of you are Baha'is on this call, and some of you are not. If you're not, I would highly recommend you search online for Message from the Universal House of Justice, March 1, 2017. Because I think that message provides a framework for potentially how we should be thinking about our economic lives. And not just as an employee, but also as an employer, not just as a consumer, but also a producer, and on and on. It provides that framework for every aspect of our economic life. So what is really that word? I don't know, but I really think that the future is going to be a bit different than what we've seen in the past. I think that the lines between nonprofit and for-profit should inevitably be blurred, because for-profits should stand for the betterment of the world. Why shouldn't they? Why should that be left to just the nonprofits? And I think that blurring is what is going to really make our everyday professions also so much more fulfilling and enjoyable.
Thank you. What responsibility do you think successful capitalists have, not only to their workers, but to society itself?
Well, again, I think this letter puts it the best that, in fact, I'm going to bring up, because I have this right now on my screen. If you don't mind, I'll share. Let me see if I can share my.
While Payam is doing that, I should explain to those of you who don't know that the Universal House of Justice is the leadership body for the entire Baha'i world. It's democratically elected from that entire world.
So this is what I was going to share, this quote, that every choice, and in this case, is a Baha'i makes, because this letter was written to the Baha'is of the world. But frankly, the universal house of justice is called universal because it belongs to all of us. And it doesn't matter from what background we are. But to me, this is really it represents a major foundational way of thinking that every choice that we make as employer or employer, producer, consumer, borrower or lender, benefactor or beneficiary leaves a trace behind. And the moral duty to lead a coherent life demands that one's economic decisions be in accordance with lofty ideals, that the purity of one's aims be matched by the purity of one's actions to fulfill those aims. By consecrating oneself to the service of others, one finds meaning and purpose in life and contributes to the upliftment of society itself. So I guess the real question here is, for a business or an entrepreneur, what is the bigger cause that my business is about? Because thinking that my business is only about maximizing profits, maximizing shareholder value, really appears to be a very archaic way to define success. And it's a very archaic way to think, given all the facts and figures that we have, it's a very archaic way to think that that will lead to happiness, my happiness or the happiness of others. So to me, it seems like thinking about the trace of our decisions and the trace that they will leave behind and the impact they will have on the world, whether small or large. So, what is motivating me maximization of profits, maximization of the value of the organization. Is it me wanting to compete at any cost with others? If my success in business relies on someone else's demise, is that potentially the right way for me to think about my business? Those are, I think, the difficult questions that entrepreneurs should really be thinking about as they build their businesses.
Right. Well, you run One Planet, which is a good-sized company, several different divisions within it. Given that philosophy, the one that you just expressed and the one that you showed us from the Universal House of Justice, what does One Planet do differently than other tech companies?
Let me go back to this short presentation that I have, because there's I think a couple of slides that may be helpful, because I really think about it is about both sides. It is the responsibility really goes both ways. As an employee, what do I do? As an employer, what should we do? So, because often employees feel that, well, I cannot do much because I don't run this company. I don't have control over the outcome. I think it's a little bit, I don't know if I would sign up for that. So these are a few examples. If I am an employee, what can I do different? Well, it's a spirit through which I offer my work. We know, at least it is in the Baha'i writings, that work performed in the spirit of service represents the highest form of worship. So the spirit through which I offer my work really makes all the difference. Now, an example is, do I greet people with a happy and joyful presence, or are they an annoyance? Do I do my best, regardless of how much I get paid or how much I may or may not like my employer or the job? Do I make everyone feel welcomed? Do I look at each individual as a noble being worthy of my time and the best quality of service I can offer them? And if I'm a Baha'i, do I take those Baha'i holidays off? Because there is something beyond that physical experience of not being in that place, and there is something more profound that happens when I recognize those opportunities to reflect on the spiritual side of things. And if I'm a business owner, am I just maximizing my own profits, or do I offer profit share? Do I consider gender equity? How about racial equity in my organization? And by the way, do I do that just because now that is the trend, or am I doing it because that's the right thing to do? And do I shut down my business? Again, from behind, do I shut down my business by holidays and still pay the employees? Do I consider the overall social impact of my company? Do I consider the consequence of my decisions? Worrying about the impact of those decisions, worrying about the trace they leave behind, and in a sense, the ripple impact the effect of those decisions. These are some of the things that we do, and I just want to share this with you. So one of the things that we do is that, by the way, very few employees in our company are Baha'is, and but the Baha'i Holy Days give us an opportunity to bring all of us together. It doesn't matter what's the background. You know, some are atheists, some are Muslims, some are Christian. Doesn't matter. We all get together, and many of us, it's not a requirement, but they celebrate those as service days. And these are days that they go on, they somehow benefit the world. It could be that they simply go out there and visit the elderly. It could be that they go to school and act as a volunteer. Whatever they want to do is up to them. There's one requirement we have, and that is don't serve in political parties on that day, because by their nature, they're divisive. Let's make this one day a unifying day. Gender equity is really key. So about 60% of our employees are women, and just over 50% of our executives are women. Now, some people ask me a question. They say that, well, why 60%? And I feel that the pendulum has to go a little bit to the other side before it lands in the middle. You know, that's kind of how things balance. It's not going to just go in the middle all of a sudden. So we have really made that a major focus. One of the arms of our business is investment in other startups. And 60% of the capital we invest goes into woman-founded and run companies, or companies founded and run by people of color.
One Planet also supports BahaiTeachings.org, or you do personally. And you and I have worked together almost 10 years now, amazingly enough, on that project. Talk about that a little bit and tell the group why you made the decision to do that.
So many years ago, I guess now it's 10 years, my wife Guya and I, we decided that, you know, we're not doing what many people did, like my own parents did, and go pioneering to spread the message of the Baha'i faith. And, you know, I don't know which message from the Universal House of Justice was that in it, they remind us that, you know, Baha'i faith offers the best framework for the ills of the society today and for the betterment of the world. If anyone else has better answers, better solutions, please bring them, present them. So today, the Baha'i faith, to our knowledge, represents the best answers. And if that's the case, we want as many people as possible to hear about the Baha'i faith and learn about the Baha'i faith. And so I've been in the tech world for a very long time, and I understand how the internet works and how we can build in a sense of presence online. And it was a way for me and for my wife to partner and to build a service that would allow Baha'is from all walks of life to be able to share their thoughts, Baha'i-inspired thoughts, but it's their thoughts about different subjects, and really on all kinds of subjects. Now over 6,000 articles have been published over the years. And so that was the idea, that ultimately Baha'is would be able to share their ideas, and also anyone who will search for anything spiritual that the Baha'i faith touches on, which is almost everything, would be able to learn about the Baha'i faith when they would search in Google and elsewhere. So that has been the goal. I think we are far from it, but that's a North Star, and hopefully one day we'll get there. And I'm really thankful to many of you who are on this call, and you've written many articles for Baha'i teachings. And for those of you who don't know, David has written, I want to say, over 1,500 articles now. And I saw Arthur Dahl, he has written articles, and I know there are many others who've done that. So it is, we provide a shell and a frame, and it was up to the community to fill it with amazing content, and you did.
The topic of this talk is the need for a new framework in business and economy, and Payam's already touched on some of those requirements. But Payam, I'd like you to talk a little bit, just at a little different level for this part of the discussion, and tell us, in your view, what economic system do the Baha'i teachings recommend? Is it capitalism, socialism, communism? How would you define the vision of a new framework that the Baha'i faith suggests for the world economy?
Sure. So I'm not an economist, and I'm in no shape or form an expert in this space. But what I can tell you is that Baha'i Faith does not recommend any of those. And Baha'i Faith rather represents an economic system that is designed to serve all, that's designed to serve humanity. You know, we have extremes of wealth and poverty today in the world. We have rampant materialism and wasteful consumerism. Self-interest and survival of the fittest, in a sense, is a North Star for many who call themselves capitalists. So how do we change that? Is really, I think, the focus of the Baha'i Faith. How do we make sure that we live a coherent life that is designed to make the world a better place? And thinking that my economic life as an entrepreneur or consumer should be separate from my spiritual life is something that I believe Baha'i Faith wants to get us to rethink. Because to live a coherent life really means that we have to be putting these spiritual teachings into our everyday work, into our profession. You know, I'm going to share another, I could just share another quote with you all. There are many quotes in the Baha'i Faith about work as worship. But I'll give you this example. In the Baha'i cause, arts, sciences, and all crafts are counted as worship. The man who makes a piece of notepaper to the best of his ability, conscientiously concentrating all his forces on perfecting it, is giving praise to God. A physician ministering to the sick, gently, tenderly, free from prejudice, and believing in the solidarity of the human race, is giving praise. So I think that is really the key question. How do we do that in our professions on a daily basis? I think that will represent a new way of thinking about our economic lives. And of course, that is far from the way that capitalism or communism or socialism is practiced today.
Thank you. Last question, and feel free to riff on this as much as you like. What can entrepreneurs and their companies contribute to the world spiritually?
You know, there is a book that I highly recommend anyone interested in business to read. It is not a Baha'i book. It's written by Simon Sinek. And I love this book, 99.9% of it. It's called The Infinite Game. I say I love this book, but there's 0.1% that, I question, is because he calls businesses infinite and people finite. Because businesses can go living beyond we can, but I feel like we are more infinite than the businesses are. But anyhow, but one thing that he says, and I absolutely believe in, goes back to this whole idea of blurring the line between for-profit and non-profit, meaning that every business should have a cause. You know, he calls in that book a just cause. And I think that the way that in the Baha'i Faith we often talk about is social impact. It doesn't matter what my business is as an entrepreneur, but the question is, what is the impact I'm after? And you know what's interesting is that, at least I have learned over the years, when I consider that social impact, it doesn't take away from my for-profit agenda. In fact, it does make me a better for-profit. And along with it, it brings about a much more fulfilling experience. I'll give you a few examples. We have actually a culture manual. If you go to oneplanetgroup.com, on the top, you will see a link to our culture. And we decided to document our culture because we thought it's important for us, just as we open up other offices, to be able to share specifically what our culture is, but also to have a culture manual. So when a new employee comes on board in a study circle format, we bring him up to speed that what are the codes of engagement in this company. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is through having this focus, this social impact, that we have been able to build a company that not only is more successful as a for-profit than it was before, but it also has employee average tenure of over 10 years, while in Silicon Valley averages about 2.1 years. Our clients don't leave us, because imagine if you have a culture that the primary focus of this culture and the central word that everything revolves around is love. Love for your vendor, for your customers, for the employees, for the community. Well, what company doesn't want to keep working with this kind of a business? And so, like I said, our experience is that you can have your cake and eat it too. That you are able to actually build a very good for-profit by not being apologetic about bringing the social teachings that are near and dear to your heart to your workplace. They should be there. They make you a better entrepreneur. They make your business more fulfilling. And at the end of it, that fulfillment causes us to have a joy beyond any joy that will come as a result of a better financial outcome for the business that we happen to run. And as of course, as Baha'is, we believe that wealth is only praiseworthy if it's spent for the betterment of the world. So at the end of it, none of it is ours anyways. So if we really appreciate that and understand that, that none of it is really ours, and we are looking at it from a lens of detachment, then if it's meant to do well, great. If not, that is okay too. It doesn't make it though. They are not. It's not a zero-sum game. Anyone who has any interest in learning about more of the specifics of how we run a business and how we do it, I will be happy to have these conversations. And I can tell you that there are many others who are attempting to learn what's the best way to run a business by putting some of the teachings of the faith into work. And Julian McQueen and his wife Kim in Pensacola, Florida, they're doing an amazing job running a chain of, I believe, 35 hotels. And they've done a phenomenal job of putting in place a culture and in a sense, an economic system for their organization that is unlike any other you see in the hospitality industry.
Thank you so much, Payam. Now is the time for applause. Thank you very much.